You're standing in a dealership showroom under lights specifically designed to make paintwork glow. A salesperson slides a piece of paper across the desk. You glance at the car one more time, the one that looks so ordinary in the car park and somehow looks entirely different in here. And here is the question that decides everything that happens next. The question almost nobody in Britain gets asked correctly. Nobody asks, can you afford this £32,000 car? They ask, can you afford £340 a month? And the moment you answer that second question instead of the first, you have already lost, even if you drive away feeling like you won. This is not a story about whether car finance is good or bad. This is a story about one specific product, the one financing 9 out of every 10 new cars bought on finance in Britain today. And why the phrase "and why it never ends" in this video's title is not exaggeration. It is a precise, almost clinical description of how the product is actually designed to work. Here is the number that should stop you. Personal contract purchase, PCP, now accounts for roughly 90% of new cars bought on finance by ordinary consumers in the UK. Total car finance debt across new and used vehicles combined has reached nearly £39.6 billion in the past year alone, up from just £11.2 billion in 2009. Debt on new cars specifically sits at around £17 billion. This is not a niche financial product anymore. This is simply how Britain buys cars now. So let's actually understand what you are agreeing to, because the structure itself is the entire trick, quietly rearranged to make a large number feel small. On a standard car loan or hire purchase, you finance the whole value of the car and eventually own it outright, the way most people assume car finance always works. PCP does something structurally different, and it is worth sitting with exactly how. It calculates what the car will probably be worth at the end of your contract, called the guaranteed minimum future value, and only finances the difference, the depreciation, between today's price and that future value. This is why the monthly payment looks so much smaller than you would expect. For a £25,000 or £30,000 car, you are never actually paying for the car itself. You are only ever paying to rent its decline in value for a fixed number of years, with the option to buy it properly at the very end if you still want to. Let's put real numbers on this. Take a fairly typical £25,000 car with a £3,000 deposit over 36 months at 8% APR with a guaranteed minimum future value of £12,000. Your monthly payment comes out to roughly £340. Over 3 years, that is £12,240 in monthly payments, on top of your £3,000 deposit. Add those together, and you have already paid £15,240, and you still do not own the car. To actually own it, you now need to find that final £12,000 balloon payment, pay it, and your total cost of ownership reaches £30,240 for a car that costs £25,000 on the forecourt. Over £5,000 of that is pure interest, the price of renting the depreciation instead of buying the asset. Now here's the part the title actually refers to, the part that makes this genuinely different from a normal loan, and the part that explains why so many people who describe themselves as sensible with money still end up here. Almost nobody pays that final balloon payment. At the end of the term, you are offered 3 choices. Hand the car back and walk away with nothing to show for 3 years of payments. Pay the balloon and finally own it outright. Or, and this is what the vast majority of people actually do, use whatever small equity exists in the car as a deposit on an entirely new PCP agreement, on an entirely new car with a new car smell and a new set of features you did not previously know you wanted. You trade up. The monthly payment resets to roughly the same comfortable figure it always was. The clock resets, and the arrangement that felt temporary, a sensible 3-year commitment, quietly becomes permanent, stretching not across one 3-year term but across your entire driving life, one rolling agreement after another, forever renting the decline in value of whatever happens to be sitting on your driveway this particular year. There are constraints buried inside this contract that most buyers never fully register at the point of signing. Mileage caps, typically 8,000 to 10,000 miles a year, with excess charges running anywhere from 3 pence to 15 pence a mile if you go over. Drive an extra 3,000 miles in a year. entirely plausible for anyone with a longer commute or a growing family, and you could be facing a genuinely painful bill the moment the agreement ends. Condition checks apply too. Scuffed alloys, a small dent, worn tires, all of it gets itemized and charged against you at handback, precisely when you have the least leverage to argue. It is worth knowing there is a genuine legal safety valve buried in all of this, one almost nobody is ever told about at the point of sale. Under the Consumer Credit Act, once you have paid 50% of the total amount payable on a PCP or HP agreement, you're entitled to voluntarily terminate it and hand the car back, walking away from the remaining payments entirely. It will not undo money already spent. But if your circumstances change, a job loss, a growing family, a car that no longer suits your life, this is the exit door that actually exists, and dealerships rarely mention it because it works against them, not you. For comparison, hire purchase agreements on the same car typically run noticeably higher each month because you are financing the entire value of the car rather than just its depreciation. But you own it outright the moment the final payment clears, with no balloon, no mileage cap, and nothing left to negotiate at the end. PCP wins on the number that appears on the page each month. HP quietly wins on the number that matters most, the one at the very end of the contract, when the car is simply, finally, yours. And there is a genuinely serious problem hiding underneath all of this, one that regulators themselves have now formally acknowledged, and it is worth explaining properly because it affects millions of ordinary people who did absolutely nothing wrong. The Financial Conduct Authority's Motor Finance Redress Scheme addresses years of historic commission arrangements where dealers were quietly paid more by lenders for pushing customers toward higher interest rates, entirely invisibly, without those customers ever being told this arrangement existed. You would sit across the desk from a salesperson who had a direct financial incentive to talk you into a worse rate than you could have qualified for, and no requirement whatsoever to mention it. If you took out car finance before November 2024, you may be owed compensation you never even knew to ask for. This was not a handful of rogue salespeople. This was for years the basic architecture of how car finance commission worked across a large part of the industry, quietly rewarding dealers for making your deal worse, never better. So, what does the alternative actually look like in real terms over real time, rather than in the abstract way these comparisons usually get presented? Take that same £340 a month PCP payment and instead root it into a simple, boring investment at a long-run average return of around 7% a year, the same steady, unglamorous approach this channel keeps coming back to. Over 10 years, that consistent monthly contribution grows to somewhere in the region of £58,000. Not because you did anything clever, and not because you timed a market or picked a winning stock, simply because the money was building something month after month, instead of paying to rent a depreciating object you were always going to hand back at the end anyway. Stretch that same comparison across an entire driving life. 3 decades of continuous rolling PCP agreements versus 3 decades of the same monthly amount invested instead, and the gap stops being a curiosity and becomes something closer to a second retirement fund, sitting quietly, unclaimed because nobody ever stopped to run the numbers side by side. None of this means every car purchase needs a spreadsheet and a moral judgment attached to it, and it is not a suggestion that anyone driving a finance car has made some kind of mistake. PCP genuinely suits some people well, drivers who want predictable lower payments, who like changing cars every few years, and who understand precisely what they are signing before they sign it. The actual problem was never the product itself. It is the question everyone is trained to ask at the desk, under those very deliberate lights. Can I afford £340 a month tells you almost nothing useful about what you are actually agreeing to. What does this car actually cost me in total by the time I either own it outright or hand it back and start the entire cycle again? Tells you everything you actually need to know before you sign anything at all. Before you sign anything, ask for the total amount payable, not the monthly figure. Ask what the balloon payment actually is and whether you have any realistic intention of ever paying it. And ask yourself, honestly, whether you're about to own a car or simply agreeing to rent its decline in value for the next 3 years, and then doing exactly the same thing again. If you learned something from this video, hit that subscribe button. I'll see you in the next one.